Have you ever spent 4 hours planning a lesson only to ditch it halfway through the first 10 minutes? Don't worry, you're in good company. Welcome to the club because I've been there. I know most of you, if you're a teacher, listening to me, probably have been there at least once or twice in your career. Now, some of you have might already know this talk. It's going to be a little bit different than a podcast episode because I delivered the very, very short version of this last week at the New Voices event from Macmillan. However, that was a 15-minute, very tight conference style version. No tangents, very unlike me. No detours, very, very unlike me, and just very clean highlights. But today, because you're getting the extended cut, the full breakdown with all of my stories, all of the justifications, all the little messy reality moments that happen behind the slides, and some extra examples I didn't have time for during that event. So let me just throw it up on the screen for us because here's the thing. I've worked with teachers in a lot of different settings, CELTA, private lessons, school trainings, and the same pattern keeps showing up. We tend to overplan, and it's not our fault as teachers. We're conditioned to do this, but it's getting a little bit worse because we tend to overcomplicate things. And when we add layers and layers and layers of detail onto a lesson plan or onto some activities until the actual point of the lesson is so buried under admin and aesthetics and those new fun tech tools, it causes me anxiety, great anxiety. So let's be honest. A lot of us have been taught to plan like we're being graded because in some of the courses that we've taken, we are being graded or being assessed, and not taught to plan like we're teaching real people. And so planning has kind of become performative. You're not planning for your students anymore. You're planning for your boss or the tutor or your coordinator. And the results of that are it's predictable. So there's 5 claims crammed into one class. Tasks that look great on paper absolutely flop when we try real humans in that little equation there. And clarification stages that feel less like teaching and more like we're auditioning for a TED Talk. And I get it. Look, the pressure of being quote unquote professional in ELT right now is so real. And I've been in schools where teachers' lesson plans were evaluated more harshly than their actual lessons. So of course we're being conditioned to make these things that might not be helpful. And I've trained or had trainees that spent more than, I don't even know, a few hours formatting headers, and everything has to be Times New Roman and size 12 font. You know what I mean? They did more of that than thinking about what their students actually needed. And that is not professionalism in teaching. It is performance for teaching. So here's the problem for teachers, and I empathize with you because I am one. It's draining. It's confusing for our students. It's draining for us. It's burying the whole purpose of whatever lesson you're trying to deliver under a pile of paperwork. So I started asking myself, and later the teachers that I was working with, one deceptively simple question. What's the minimum that this lesson needs to actually work? Not to impress, not to tick boxes, just to function, to be effective. And that's where the med filter, I'll tell you what that means, was born. It was a way of me trying to cut through the noise and keeping just enough to make the lesson land without wasting time, energy, brain power, because Lord knows, teachers need a little reprieve.
Hey there, it's Kelly, and if you're here for miracle fixes, shiny classroom hacks, or whatever today's buzzword is trending, yeah, not gonna happen. What you will get is real talk about English teaching, teacher training, and the chaos we actually deal with in ELT. So let's get into it.
I know, you probably already know me. However, let me get my chapstick on. Before we dive in to this med filter, whatever I want to call this, I haven't really, I've distilled it enough to present on it, but I don't even know where this is going. But before I do that, I want to dive in to me. I don't like talking about me, but hey, let's talk about me a little bit, because I think you need the background, because context matters. Context matters for our students, and context matters for you. So here we go. Well, I've been in ELT for more than 15 years, and like most of you, I didn't start with some grand plan. Nope. I started in the trenches. Y'all, I'm still in the trenches, okay? I teach kids who barely sit still. I try running conversation classes with teenagers who would rather be anywhere else than sitting with their teacher. Coaching executives who would happily pay, but also happily cancel last minute because they've got other more important things to do. So you name it, I've probably taught it or been in a situation where I had to observe. And then, like a lot of teachers, I shifted into teacher training and management. I became a CELTA tutor. I started coordinating departments, building curricula from scratch, trying to fix broken systems. And in all of these roles that I've had, and hopefully in the future will continue to have, I saw the same problem repeated over and over. Teachers, good teachers, drowning under planning expectations that had little to do with actual learning. So I remember one teacher actually that showed me a 12-page lesson plan formatted perfectly. Everything, every stage, everything was mapped down to the minute, references cited. It was like a beautiful dissertation. And in the reality, the students hated the class. They hated it. You could tell by their reaction. You could tell by how they were reacting to it. They felt rushed. They didn't connect to the material. They were a little distant. And by the end, no one could really say what the lesson had been about. And so that plan looked fantastic on paper, but in practice, it was a disaster. So imagine having to deliver that feedback to a teacher that thought they had checked all of the boxes. Now, I've also seen whole teams buried alive under PowerPoint presentations, slide decks, whatever you want to call it. If you're not a millennial like me, they're presentations, whatever. You know the type of schools, you guys know what I'm talking about. They think that if you have 50 slides with animations and transitions and vocabulary lists, then you must be a professional. Of course, you must be a professional. Why wouldn't you be with all of that material prepared? But meanwhile, the teachers are clicking through like robots, and the students are asleep. That's not learning. That's just compliance dressed up as teaching. And at the heart of the problem, most of what we're told about a lesson planning and about the rules, it's not talking about results. Follow the format, add the tech, hit all of the things on the checklist. None of that guarantees learning. So here's what I started to ask myself. What if we strip everything away? I like poking the bear. So I thought to myself, like, what if we stopped looking at planning and start looking at planning well and everything's beautiful, and start looking at planning as the tool that helps us teach. I know it sounds weird, but I don't think people look at planning that way anymore. So the med filter was born from that question, like, what could we strip back so that we actually have lesson plans that help teaching and not this performative whatever we're doing? And It's not about doing less. I'm going to go into this in great detail. This is going to be a long episode, but it's not about doing less. It's about just doing what matters, what actually matters to students. Not about cutting corners. It's about cutting through all of the noise that we get in ELT. All of those things I love. Don't get me wrong. I love a good conference. I love a good webinar. I love all that stuff. I'm into CPD. I like it. But also, it's super overwhelming. Let's be honest about it. We have to center the learner in all of these decisions, and we need to give teachers permission to show up in the room with presence and not pressure. So, all right, let me get it back on the screen so you can follow along with me, because this is like half podcast episode, half presentation. I just felt like I had to get it off my chest. So let's get into the heart of the issue. Why do we overplan? I mean, I feel like I've talked about it for like 5 minutes now, and why is it not working? Okay, so we've all done it. You sit down to write your lesson plan. You've got a little template or whatever your school gives you, whatever the course is mandating that you have to do. And you start filling out every possible detail: timing, procedure, anticipated problems, anticipated solution, answers to all the questions your students might never even ask. And before you know it, you've spent 3 hours building a script for a show that doesn't actually exist. I know. Listen, I went through all the training programs too. I get it. I get it. And sometimes you have to do that because you have to do compliance stuff. But then the lesson happens. Real human students walk in with their very real personalities, real moods, real questions. And 10 minutes in, half of what you meticulously wrote down is completely irrelevant. So, just an honest truth here. Real lessons don't follow our scripts. Students are not robots, as much as we would love them to be. They're not. They bring energy, they bring baggage, they bring humor, they bring confusion sometimes, and they're sharper than we expect sometimes. And sometimes they're just completely lost. And the more tightly we cling to this perfect script, the less room we leave for those moments. We stop listening, we stop noticing, and we stop being responsive. So think back to, your last class. Did you follow your plan word for word? Or did you adapt on the fly? Maybe ditched an activity or two, added something spontaneous, maybe slowed down when you saw the students were struggling. So that flexibility is real teaching, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. And that's presence. The script doesn't allow for that. So the kicker is most of the planning that I see, I mean, I am a CELTA tutor, so, let's just throw that out there. But whether it's from new teachers or CELTs or even experienced teachers, honestly, big schools, little schools, private teachers, it's not really built for learners. It's built for paperwork. And I can't judge programs too much, like courses, like CELTA courses. Yeah, you need to have the paperwork because you need to have the documentation to prove that you earned that certificate. But then when we get into the real world, the real world doesn't work like that. Okay, anyway, I will go off on many tangents here. But so it's these very heavy, text-heavy plans are built so that someone can say that you tick the box, this is a professional-looking plan. But professional looking and effective aren't always the same thing. So I can tell you so many times, how many times I've read a beautiful, it's like perfect, it's just awesome, perfect little plan, only to watch the actual class crash and burn. On the flip side, I've seen some teachers scribble down, and this is not a joke, 3 bullet points on a Post-it note, walk into class and deliver a session that hit every learner need perfectly. Now, I'm not saying don't plan, but what I am saying is compliance-driven planning is not the same as teaching. So if planning for paperwork doesn't work, what do we need to do instead? So this is where I kind of came up with this crazy idea of the med filter, because it stops forcing us into ticking boxes, to-do lists, and it starts forcing us to ask the question, what will make this plan not look impressive, but actually work for my learners? So I've got all sorts of stuff for you here. Ready for it? What exactly is the med filter? Well, let's define it clearly. The term is, I've got notes here, so I'm going to follow along with them, but this is like a whole presentation. I had I had a whole spiel, and then I had to get it down to 15 minutes. So let me just go off on tangents. So the term is minimum effective dose, and it doesn't come from education at all. It comes from medicine. So doctors use it to describe the smallest amount of a drug or treatment that's needed to get the desired effect. Anything else, too little of a drug or treatment or whatever medicine, is going to be ineffective. Anything more, at best, it's wasteful, right? But at its worst, it could actually be harmful. So when I came across this, I thought, well, okay, wait a second, Kelly, because I always tend to roll these ideas around in my head, and that's exactly what's happening in our lesson planning. We often give way more than necessary. We overload students, we overload ourselves, and the actual learning gets kind of buried. So think about it. If you have a headache, you don't take an entire bottle of aspirin. You take 1 or 2 pills, which are proven to work to alleviate the pain. More isn't better. It's just kind of reckless. Well, I mean, probably you'll just pee it out. But anyways, and yet in teaching, we still fall into the trap of thinking the more we plan, meaning just like loading up lesson plans and trying to get through everything, the better the lesson will be. But more doesn't equal better. Usually more just equals muddier in terms of lesson planning. So in education, the med filter means asking to yourself, what is the smallest, clearest, and most powerful combination of choices that will actually deliver learning? Not everything you could possibly do, not all the options on Pinterest. The core essentials that guarantee students leaving the room have learned or done something real. So as a CELTA tutor and coordinator, I've watched hundreds of hours. I don't even know. It might be getting to the 1,000. I'm not sure, to be honest, how many hours of lessons. And the strongest ones, regardless of whether they were like systems, skills, grammar, functional language, they all had 3 things in common. A very clear aim, visible in what students produced, not just written off the top of the plan, whatever. Yeah, put it there. No, what did the students actually produce? 2, a core task that actually required students not just to use the language, or not just to recognize the language, but to actually use the language. Because we're language teachers. If the students aren't using the language, I don't know why we're here. And 3, and this is my most important, I guess this is kind of the one that I think is the most important, is a built-in moment where the teacher stopped delivering, let's say, the lesson and started responding to what the students were doing or producing. It was a chance for a pivot, is what I call it, but you can adapt, recycle, whatever word you want to stick on there. Again, based on what the students were actually doing in the room. And that's it. No bells and whistles, a very clear aim, a purposeful task, and a pivot point. And that's the med filter. So let me stress This isn't about minimalist teaching for the sake of being edgy. It's not about cutting clarification and skipping support or winging it through with no structure. No, the med filter is exactly what it's called. It's a filter. It's about smarter planning, keeping what matters most so that you can show up as a teacher and not a performer. The big idea here is simple. The med filter forces you to design your lessons around what actually matters, not what looks good on paper. And that's exactly what we'll be breaking down next, the 3 core decisions to try and make it work. Okay, practical. That's what I love. So the med filter, it really boils down to these 3 core questions, decisions, pillars, whatever you want to call them. They shape everything else in your lesson. These are not the only components of your lesson. They shape everything else in your lesson. So your materials, your timing, your feedback, even your flexibility. These are the non-negotiables. So number 1 is the aim. This is your clarity of purpose. And I don't mean vague statements like improve speaking skills. That's a wish, not an aim. An aim is specific, it's observable, and it's something concrete that you can actually see or hear the students do. Something you can envision. I tell my trainees a lot is like, can you see it in your brain TV? Like, can you envision this happening? If you can, then that's great. That's what you need. So for example, deliver a 60-second pitch using persuasive language. That's clear. It doesn't have to be worded like this. You can word it however, but it has to be clear. I can literally point at it and say, yes, that happened. Here, I can get you a recording if I need to. Too many lessons. Oh, too many lessons. The aims are just in this, like in Narnia, like in the land of abstraction, like practice reading. Review present perfect. It's like improve fluency. I love the improve fluency ones. Like none of those tell you what the students are actually going to do. And if you can't picture it, your learners definitely can't either. So moving on. So you can ask yourself, will I be able to see these students doing this in class? If the answer is no, your aim needs tightening. Moving on to number 2, the task. This is where the real learning happens. A task isn't just an activity. It's the thing that forces the students to apply the language. You gotta, like, I don't know, solve a problem, express an opinion, create something meaningful. I don't care. Whatever you want to do is fine, but it has to be a meaningful task. Here's the task. If I delete this task from my lesson plan, just remove it, would my aim still be achieved? And if yes, then your task isn't strong enough. Let me give you a contrast, a gap fill. That checks knowledge. But writing a 90-second pitch using persuasive adjectives, that applies the knowledge in a real context. Both of these are important, but you need to have a task. Students need to actually do something. So one is practice, the other is production. And production is where growth lives, because that's where they make all sorts of mistakes, so you can help them out along the way. And here's another trap that teachers fall into: having 3 or 4 main tasks, just in case. Main means kind of that, I mean, in the definition, right? I mean, if we look at main, that's just kind of one, you know? So just throwing it out there. But when you try to do everything, you end up doing nothing. One strong, intentional task is enough. Build around it, deepen it, extend it out. Don't bury it under busy work. And 3, this is my personal favorite, is the pivot. This is probably the most underused, and actually I find it to be the most powerful point of this med filter that I've Frankenstein together. The pivot is your moment of responsiveness. Okay, it's not an emergency fix. It's not winging it. It's built-in pause in your lesson where you stop and you look at what's happening and then you adapt. That could mean, I don't know, playing back a student's recording to spark self-reflection, adding a challenge prompt if the class is flying through the materials, or slowing down, recycling language if they're struggling. It doesn't matter what the pivot looks like necessarily, but it matters that it's there because it's responsive. And here's why. A lesson without a pivot is performance. You are a clown acting on the stage of ELT teaching. A lesson with a pivot is teaching, because real learning happens when you respond to what's in front of you, not what's on the paper. So these are the 3 core MED questions, pillars, whatever you want to call them: aim, task, pivot. Get those clear, and suddenly everything else, your warmers, your clarification stages, your feedback, everything else falls into place naturally. If you skip over these, you risk delivering a lesson that looks fine on paper, but doesn't actually move your students forward. And next, we'll dive into each of these in greater detail. Here we go. So, 1 clear aim. 1 aim. I mean, I was dealing with teachers the other week that have like 35-minute classes. How you can have multiple aims in a 35-minute session, I'm not really sure. I would struggle with that. Like, seriously struggle, because 35 minutes is a very short amount of time to kind of like get through anyways. And then there's people that have like 2-hour lessons. Yeah, still, even with the 2 hours, you kind of gotta like, you gotta have 1 clear aim. So this is where so many lesson plans that I receive, I mean, receiving these physical plans, they just start to wobble right from the get-go. Because your aim is fuzzy, everything that follows it is going to be fuzzy too. So think of the aim, it's your anchor. It is your anchor. And it's the thing that gives you direction throughout the entire lesson. So without it, you're basically just throwing activities at students and hoping something sticks, kind of like when your grandma is cooking spaghetti and throwing it against the wall to see if it's ready yet. Like, not sure yet, you know? Okay, so most of the aims that I see in plans, again, plans that are handed to me, given to me, fall into one of 2 categories. Either they're too broad, like improve speaking fluency. I can't tell you how many times I've received that. I'm using my Macmillan mug too, just so everybody can see, because this is perfect for this occasion. Oh God, improve speaking fluency. Yeah, it kills me every time. Or they're too like very specific, but not, like review present perfect. Okay, but what does that mean? Like, reviewing usually happens in someone's head, so if they can't like show me something, I'm not sure if they've reviewed it or not. Anyways, neither of those really actually tells me what the learners are going to be doing, and if I can't tell, then the students can't tell either. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing, because they're supposed to be that's my job as the teacher. Instead, a really good aim is super specific. You can use SMART aims if you want. That's a common thing that people do, but I just need to be, for me, it needs to be specific, observable, and it needs to be tied to some sort of output. So for example, share a personal work experience using past perfect and present perfect. Again, you don't have to share these with students. I need to know what they're going to be producing. It's clear. I know what I'll hear at the end of class. And if I'm not hearing that, then something went wrong in the, along the way. And then I have to figure out how to get them to that point. Or give 2 pieces of advice using modal verbs of obligation and suggestion. Again, I can picture students saying those things. So that's it. That's the test. Okay, I was on a CELTA one time. And one of the most common issues I see with the CELTA trainees, it's like their aims are written for the tutor, not for the classroom, and they write things like, "Listen, I get it. They're learning. It's not. I'm not making fun of it, because I was there too. I have to go back to my aims. Anyways, students will understand the difference between for and since. How can you even measure that? Like, what? Like, I can't, that's impossible for me to measure. So, great, but what does that actually look like? How do you know that they understood it? Understanding is kind of invisible, but saying, oh, students will tell me how long they've been in their current job using for and since, now that's something that I can check, I can observe, I can give feedback on, we can, because they're producing something. So there's the question that you have to ask yourself every time you plan. Will I be able to watch or listen to students doing this in class? If the answer is no, your aim isn't clear enough. Here's the magic of getting the aim right. When the aim is very clear, everything else is easier. Your task becomes more purposeful, your feedback is on target, your timing is easier to manage. You stop cramming all of those filler activities in, but just to feel busy, but they don't really lead anywhere and they're not helping out in this specific lesson. So before you even open a course book, before you start Googling activities everywhere, stop and just set the aim. Make it visible, make it doable, because that's the foundation. Like, we got to start somewhere. And if you skip this step, the rest of your lesson is just going to be floating. Now, moving on, step 2. One intentional task. Now, if you have, like, I don't know, 2-3 hours of classes, which I feel like that's overwhelming for students, but hey, then maybe you'll have like 2 tasks, but I would prefer to really expand a task than to move on to another task, because I'd have to set the whole thing up again. But it's just my preference. You do you. Again, normal, traditional, standard 1 hour, 90-minute lessons, even 35-minute lessons, one intentional task. So if the aim is the brain of the lesson, then your task is the heartbeat. It is the thing that pumps life into everything else. This is what your students actually do. It's not the warm-up, it's not the controlled grammar drill, whatever you throw in there. This is the task. It's the moment. It's like that moment that we deliver, we can get them to deliver on the aim. That's what it is. So here's a problem. Too often, what teachers call the main task is actually busy work. I'm going to get judgmental for a second, because I've seen this in a lot of lessons. And it's where the core task is like a gap fill or a matching exercise or reading a text and answering some comprehension questions. And are those activities bad? Nope. Inherently, not at all. They have their place. They build familiarity, and let's be honest, they don't require students to do anything meaningful with the language or with the content of what they're engaging with. Necessary? Perhaps. Intentional task? Maybe not. So, if the task doesn't deliver on the aim, it's a filler. Pure and simple. So we can compare a gap fill where students plug in modals that checks form, accuracy. Not much more than that. Understanding. But if they write a 90-second pitch using persuasive adjectives and modals, that forces them to apply the language in a real-world way. So it's delivering on the aim. Another one, like people like, but Kelly, what about the skills? Okay, got it. Calm down. Hold on. Reading a list of biographies and answering comprehension questions. Great. You're practicing reading sub skills. But again, I like tests. I want them to then engage with it and do something with whatever the content of the skill that they're doing. So they could be recording an audio bio using 3 examples of past achievements, because that's measurable, that's personal, and something that is real, actually, because we've all seen the cringy, cheesy things that go up on LinkedIn. Anyways, so here's the thing that I see a lot. So teachers will pile on like 3, 4, even 5 activities just in case, and they want this like safety net. But when you overload tasks, students end up just rushing. They just rush through. and none of it really lands deeply. You know, they're just kind of going through the motions. And one strong intentional task for me is enough. Because if you design it well, you can build around it. You can prepare for it, you can scaffold it, you can recycle it, you can reflect on it, you can expand on it, you can do all sorts of things if you have like a really decent task. So here's the question to ask yourself. If I deleted this task from the plan, would the aim still happen? If yes, your task isn't strong enough. If no, then congratulations, you've found the heartbeat of your lesson. And when you've nailed the task, you've got the aim, the final piece of the med filter becomes possible, the pivot, because it's the task that it's where in the task is where you get the evidence where you're going to stop, reflect, and adapt. So if I don't know what they're doing, I need to know this before I can plan out my pivot. That's what needs to happen. And the pivot for me is where the real teaching happens. So let's bring it on. Step number 3. So the pivot point in this part of the med filter, I think what people overlook or underestimate, and I don't think it's ever been kind of, I could be completely wrong, and I'm not revolutionizing teaching at all in any way, shape, or form, but it's kind of that point where you actually dig into teaching and you actually get reactive with the students. So it's not a stage. I mean, you can plan it in as a stage, but into a stage, but it's not like a stage that has steps and things like that. So I think, again, we underestimate it. And teachers think that they've planned a pivot just because they've penciled in like 5 minutes at the end for feedback at the end of the lesson, or we have to be honest because that is not a pivot, but okay. It's wishful thinking, but a pivot isn't a throwaway stage. This is a very intentional design choice. So if you've taught for more than 5 minutes, you already know lessons don't go according to plans. Sometimes carefully crafted task, it's just, oh, it's beautiful, it flops. Sometimes students get stuck way earlier than you thought they would, and then sometimes they finish lightning fast and you're left scrambling to fill that extra time. If you've been teaching long enough, you've had all 3 of these happening to you within the same week, maybe within the same day. So the important part about a pivot, it isn't about scrapping the whole plan. This is not that, okay? It's not panic mode either. It's about designing flexibility into a plan from the beginning. It's saying, at this point, I'm going to pause. I'll check what's actually really happening, and then I'll decide whether I want to extend this, whether I need to go back and recycle something, whether I need to move on. That's a pivot. Okay. And I know some people, it's like, wow, okay. This requires a bit of a mindset shift. I almost said that completely inappropriately. Mindset shift. Stop planning for just one version of success. Because when you plan for only one ideal scenario, you're setting yourself up for frustration. Instead, start planning for at least 2 possibilities, maybe more. Because in at least 2 doors you could walk through depending on what your students show you in real time. You got these kind of like, well, where could we go? Which is still meeting the aims, just which path are we taking? So let's say your students fly through the task and they nail it. Great. Maybe a pivot would be a challenge extension. Or let's say they're drowning halfway through, a pivot to scaffold or have a model. The pivot, the point is, you don't have to guess ahead of time which way you're going. You just need to have a pivot point so that you can respond to what they might be doing. So to check to see if you can do this, you just need to ask yourself, where am I building space to respond and not react? That's the difference between a lesson that feels mechanical and something that feels more alive, more human. So let's make it a little bit concrete. I want to share some examples, real world examples with you from my own classes, some observations, pivots you could literally steal, drop into your next lesson if you want, because once you see how they work in action, I think this will start to click for everyone. So let's jump in. First, hang on, before we get to that. A lot of teachers think that they've planned this pivot, and we need to look at like what really matters. Feedback is not a pivot point. Okay. I want to say that outright. It's not a feedback stage. A pivot point is like what's happening, what do the students need right now to kind of get to the aim and improve on whatever they're producing. While I was doing this, Will, a wonderful moderator that he is, he asked me a question and kind of where this came from. Yeah, I don't remember the question that he asked me, but it jogged my memory of where I started having feelings. I do have feelings. No, where I started having these kind of like what reflections. We'll say reflections. So it reminded me of the most uncomfortable delta moment that I had. So I had finished my I think they're called LSAs, I forget. It's been a long time. LSA 4. And it was my last lesson. And I had the feedback session. And my trainer at the time, he went through step by step my feedback, but not in the way that you think. He didn't talk about what happened in my lesson. Instead, he narrowed down onto this imaginary lesson and narrated how he would have delivered it, my lesson, stage by stage, activity by activity, as if my whole lesson plan was just wrong because it wasn't his. It was like, you know what I mean? So that's, and this is what I felt. I was like, oh my God. First of all, I thought I failed, didn't, passed, got a distinction in module 2. Thank you very much. But it was like a horrific moment for me because I wasn't sure what he was trying to get at. I have other thoughts about that. But anyways, so in the feedback session, I stopped and I asked him, I said, so what I did was wrong? And he said, no. I was like, and then I asked, okay, well, was it ineffective? Should I have done it like the other way? Did I not achieve the aim of the lesson? He said, no, it worked. It just wasn't how I would have done it. All right. Needless to say, I walked away so disappointed because that wasn't feedback on my teaching. That was a description of his imaginary lesson plan and stroking his ego, what a genius he must be in developing whatever lessons. And yeah, I was frustrated to say the least. And then actually it made me stop and think, I wonder if I do this to my students. Because I was his student at the time, and I just walked away disappointed, frustrated, and was like, well, I must have clearly I can't develop my own lessons properly. So, but then, I was like, wow, I wonder if I do that to my students, like I constantly correcting them, overcorrecting them, telling them this, no, they should phrase it this way because that's how I would have phrased it. And then I thought, well, like, do I set up a single path to success and then judge them when they don't follow my path exactly? And so that was a really actually big shift for me. I enjoy taking all of these kind of negative moments in my career and saying like, well, how can I make someone in the future not feel that way? How can I be better than whatever that scenario was, whatever just went down there. And so it was a big shift for me because the truth is, language is super malleable. Communication is not one size fits all. And as long as students are reaching the aim through the task, who am I to say they have to get there by my exact route? And then I just realized I'd been planning lessons for one version of success, the one version being my version of success, instead of building space for their version of success. Because listen, if you have a task and you put it there, the pitches, the whatever, all the examples that I've been giving you, and you say, well, they should do it this way. This is how I would complete it. That's great. That's how you would complete it. They might do it differently. People express themselves differently, but can they achieve the aim and complete the task successfully, even if it's not the way that you would have done it? So if they do, then that's great. Anyways, so that's why pivot points matter. They remind us that teaching isn't about forcing students down this one scripted path. It's about creating kind of these checkpoints where we can observe and adapt and let multiple versions of success exist in the same classroom. So here's kind of a key question, and I'll throw it out to you. Are you planning lessons that only work if everything goes your way? Or are you designing flexibility for the possibility that students might take a different route to get to the same destination? So this is why pivot points are so dear to me, because when you design these kind of pivot points, you're saying, I'm ready for more than one version of success. And to make this concrete, I'm going to show you 4 real-world pivots that you can literally steal for your next class.
Real quick before we get back into it, I've got some free goodies for teachers waiting for you. Think big wins and things you can use right away. Grab them at the link to my site below, and let's dive right back in.
Okay, let's make it real time. So we've talked about pivot in theory. I've had emotional outpouring and therapy with you. So what does it actually look like in a classroom? Because I know that some of you are probably thinking, all right, Kelly, this sounds nice. How do I actually do it? So here are the 4 pivot points. Let's get on to them. Number 1 comes from like a B1 plus B2 writing lesson. It was complaint emails. Okay. Anyways, yeah, I love complaining when services are things like, no, this is bad. Oh, it's draining, but it's fun. Anyways, okay, so the students had drafted their emails and everything was on paper. It looked fine. Grammar, honestly, mostly the grammar was correct. The format was there. Nothing was quote unquote wrong. But when I read them, because I teach online, so we share documents so I can see what the students are producing at the same time, kind of real time. It's quite nice, actually. Some of them were actually very passive aggressive, unintentionally passive aggressive, and others were basically just like a list of problems and they didn't have any real focus. So technically, linguistically speaking, they were accurate, but functionally totally ineffective. And that's a really important distinction for learners, right? So writing isn't always just about being correct. It's also about making the impact that you want to have so that you can get whatever you need to get done. So, yeah, I know you've seen this before too. The student kind of ticks all the accuracy boxes, but produces something that no one in the real world would actually want to read. So I had a few choices at that point. I could have stopped the whole lesson, everybody in the class, given them feedback on tone. I could have had them peer review each other's emails, highlight what they noticed. In terms of, I never have students, typically, unless they're really advanced students, I usually don't have students give any feedback to peers on language. It's usually just how it's coming across. But all of them were kind of like, the tone was off. So I was like, that's not really going to help them here. Or I could have given them a model text and then they dissected it a little bit together to see like more models, even though they had scaffolded. Okay, instead, I chose the pivot. I was like, all right, these aren't great. I got to fix it. But, like, what do we do? I knew that I needed something that kind of landed a little bit harder. So I pulled up 2 real world complaint emails. One was very assertive, very clear, and the other was overly emotional, very unfocused. And let's be real, it's the kind of email that gets ignored or deleted because people don't want to deal with you as a customer or a client. And then I asked a very simple question. I said, which one of these would actually get the results that they're looking for? That was it. And you could kind of see the light bulb go off because they weren't just analyzing grammar anymore. That's what they were focused on, because students in a language class want to focus on the language. Great. But they were analyzing impact, and they suddenly understood the difference between being correct and being effective. So that one pivot kind of flipped the entire activity. So instead of just fixing mistakes, there was mistakes there, you know what I mean? Like punctuation, blah, 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 little things here and there. But overall, it was kind of like, okay, what a B1 plus B2 student would produce. But the students went back and they revised with a purpose. They wanted their emails to sound professional and to actually achieve something. So that was a different level of engagement, because then they started really playing with the language. Here's the key point. All of the other options I had in mind were actually pedagogically valid. They weren't wrong, but I chose this pivot in the moment because it responded directly to what the students were producing. They didn't really need correction. They needed a little correction. I gave them a little correction. They needed perspective. They needed to notice what wasn't going to work and then how to adapt it. And that's what a pivot does. It takes a task and it turns it into a learning moment. So let's jump into another context, business English classes. So let me grab that one and throw it up on the board for you. So pivot number 2 takes us over to the big business English world, which is kind of where I live day to day. Specifically, the classic 90-second elevator pitch. I deal with a lot of students that are going internationally, and they're like fairs and stuff like that. They got to meet people, introduce themselves really quick, make a good impression so that they can, get future clients and whatever they do. Making more money than teachers, pretty much what they're doing. So the setup was super simple. Students had to prepare and record a short, and I record it because I want them to give them feedback on to themselves, and then I watch it afterwards. So I like when they record. They don't like it as much, but whatever, they need to deal with it. So record a self-introduction as if they were meeting a potential client or investor or someone that they're going to meet at those things that they go to. So we had already done the prep work, useful phrases, organizational structure, mini rehearsal type of things, like how to deliver certain things the way that they wanted to deliver them. On paper, they were ready. But when they recorded and listened back to their first attempts, it was like a moment. The content was there, delivery way off. So some of the pitches were very flat and robotic. Almost all of them sounded like they were reading off a teleprompter, which, not super great. Others were filled with hesitation fillers, like, which I have a big problem with. So, yeah, it's the kettle calling the pot black, or the pot calling the kettle black. Am I the pot or the kettle? Anyways, you know the drill. And some of them just sounded really nervous, lacking confidence, zero presence. In other words, technically correct, completely forgettable. Not great when you're going to international conferences. So at that moment, I had a few options. Thought to myself, well, let's see what they can get through, and then we'll give them a pivot point to see if we can make it the way that they feel confident. Because the thing is, I want my students to feel super confident when they go into those situations. Okay. I had a few options. I could do individual, I could do whole class feedback, I could have run through a mini lesson, eye contact, body language, stress patterns. I could have had them script their openings a little bit more carefully with like changes in wording that is more familiar to them. All of those would have been fine. Instead, I chose a pivot again that hit just a little bit harder. I'm a hard hitter to my students. I think they like it. They come back for more, but okay. So I played them two contrasting recordings. One was kind of a model that we had, and then I grabbed one of my more confident students that doesn't really care. So model, confident, fluid, natural. Other one, hesitant, over rehearsed, and honestly just kind of awkward. And then I asked the question to the group: who would you hire? And there is where the magic happened. Students immediately started noticing things. I hadn't formally taught anything, yet they picked up on tone, they were looking at rhythm, pausing, intonation, pitches, they started analyzing presence, things, non-linguistic things, linguistic things. These, I mean, some of them weren't even part of the corrections feedback, the feedback that I was given. They were just like a bunch of other observations and discussions that were happening. So they were noticing the differences themselves, which I find to be more engaging and more interesting. Asking a provoking question, giving them examples, I don't know, get them thinking about other stuff. Yeah? Not just let me correct all of your grammar. So that pivot that I chose actually gave them ownership of feedback. Instead of saying, you sound a little robotic, let's try to do this, da, da, da. They were like, oh wow, this is what makes a confident pitch. We can do it that way. Try doing it. Like they were helping each other do it. I just stepped back, which for me is great because they're engaged and I'm just monitoring. And once they noticed it, they wanted to apply it. They went back, they revised, they re-recorded. They were actually kind of excited. I know, which is shocking because students don't get excited about that type of stuff. And improvement was immediate. Immediate, happened in the same class. And then of course they started doing it at home. It was like a whole nother thing. So that's a real pivot point that was powerful. It wasn't about me dumping delivery tips on them. It wasn't about creating the perfect, it was about creating this conditions for reflection. What do you think? What do you see? They saw why it mattered and they wanted to change it on their own because they want to get hired. Like their ultimate goal is to go to these conferences and get hired by clients. So, yep, that was one. Here's the next. And this one is still in the business English context, but this time it wasn't about delivery. It was all about teamwork and adaptability. All right, here's the setup. Students were working in small groups to design a very short client proposal. Again, I work with people that are like constantly doing this type of stuff. Ironically enough, I do work with a lot of people kind of in the sales arena, which shocking to me too. Okay. The task was super clear. They had to create slides, slide deck if you want, rehearse together, and deliver a concise presentation. It was like a case study type of thing. Had all the elements that you wanted: collaboration, structure, real world communication. They had to come up with on paper, solid task. Whew. As I was monitoring, I started to see a pattern. Instead of focusing on the message, all the groups are pouring all of their energy into the slides. Super text heavy slides. Bullet points everywhere. Students reading word for word for the screen. And the type of presentation. I mean, it's like death by PowerPoint. You know what I'm saying? Like brutal. So at that point, I had a decision to make. And I was like, well, what could my pivot be at this point? I could have paused the class, given them like design tips, told them you only have this many characters to put on the thing or whatever. I could have shown them a sample presentation, some new visuals are effective, but I think they're using it because they're not really focusing on the message. They just want to throw it up there and then they can read it off. Or I could have let them finish this plan, critiqued all of their slides afterwards. Valid options. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, they're almost done, so let them. Nope. I also had another pivot planned, kind of like thinking of these options, like while I'm watching in real time. I decided to throw in deliberate disruption, which is one of my favorites, by the way. I am a disruptor, I think. It was a pivot that would force them to rethink everything. So I said, okay, change of plans. The client has decided that they don't want slides anymore. So sorry. They're traveling. It's just going to be audio, no presentation. They don't have the bandwidth to be able to download. There's no visuals. That's it. So sorry. So you have 5 more minutes. Adapt and deliver your pitches without visuals. It's the I think my dad used to say this to me a lot, but then also the military used to say, adapt and overcome. Like, there you go. So panic ensued, immediate reaction, right? You can just see it was like shuffling papers, nervous laughter. Then they regrouped, as adults do. They had to strip down everything to the essentials. And they came together and they said, okay, so what's our core message? What are the 3 points that we really need to talk to the client with? How can we keep this short, clear, persuasive without hiding behind text? Because they know, like, we don't have the text anymore, so we can't send anything to him. So what can we do? And what happened next was so much better than their original plans. Instead of hiding behind those slides, students started owning their messages. They spoke more naturally. They used a little bit more eye contact when they were delivering it to me. They focused on impact and not aesthetics. And most importantly, they practiced the skills that professionals actually need: resilience. Because in the real world, clients do change their mind at the last minute, all the time. Technology does fail us, and you don't always get to rely on your visuals. So yes, I could have let them finish and critique them afterwards, but this pivot created conditions for a practice moment. They didn't just rehearse this beautifully polished presentation, they rehearsed adaptability under pressure. And that skill transfers far beyond the classroom. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. And the last one that I have actually goes kind of on the opposite end, because I live in business English world, but I do teach general English as well. So pivot number 4 comes from the opposite end of the spectrum. It's a low level grammar class. A2, B1 is generous, but you know, it could be applied to B1, but it was A2, working with modals, you know, as we do. Task was simple. Students had to write basic care or medicine instructions using must, should, can. It was a very nice, controlled, communicative task, right? So as they started writing, imagine the setup. Okay, so you know, a loved one of yours, a family member, someone you know or whatever, you need to explain to them in English how to use this medication or how to do this treatment. Okay, they started writing. I saw exactly what I expected. Things like, take this twice. You should drink water. Perfectly fine grammar, and actually using the target language, so technically correct. But functionally, I'm just thinking of like those difficult family members. Way too vague. Yeah. So this is where the gap between correct and useful really shows itself, because sure, take this twice is grammatically correct, but what does it actually mean? Twice in one day, 2 pills at once, every 12 hours. Suddenly you realize vague language here isn't just clumsy, but it's actually kind of dangerous because we're talking about medicine. So at this point, I had a few options. I think I had like 3 at the time. I could have done a quick error correction on the board, like, ooh, make sure we're more specific, you know, that type of thing. I could have stopped and gone over, you know, okay, but the modal is, you know, giving some sort of obligation or suggestion or something like that. I could have gone over it, but it doesn't include X, Y, and Z. Or I could have just modeled better examples myself, right? So I had put a nice model there and say it needs to be a little bit more specific. Instead, I wanted them to feel the difference, as I typically do. So I put 2 sentences on the board, take this twice, take 1 tablet every 12 hours with food. Then I asked, this is just a simple question, what could go wrong with the first one? And that question shifted everything. Suddenly students started imagining real world consequences. They're like, oh, this is not just a thing that we're doing in English class. Like, this actually might affect somebody. So somebody taking both pills at the same time, someone might take them with or without food. Someone might take them twice in 1 hour, and they realized, oh, this isn't just about the grammar. Kelly's not just having us write these things. It's about safety. It's about communication that actually works in the real world. Yeah. So the pivot made them go back and rewrite their instructions, not just to be correct, but actually to be useful. And that's the heart of this med filter idea. Again, pushing students beyond accuracy to more effectiveness. And that's why I love this example. It shows that the med filter isn't just for advanced learners or for business English contexts or for high stakes presentations or anything like that. It works just as well with beginners, with grammar, controlled practices, because you can put the pivot into any part of your lesson plan. And let them kind of discover the gap between doing something correctly, which often we're praised for, and doing something effectively, which sometimes students don't actually get to that point, So now we've looked at 4 real-world examples of pivot points across some skills, different levels, some different contexts. I hope what you're noticing is this. None of them were random. They were planned disruptions designed to push learning a little bit deeper. But of course, whenever I share the med filter, there's always concerns, there's always objections, and that's exactly what I want to tackle next. Before I wrap this up, this has been quite a long session, but before I wrap it up, I need to be clear about one thing. I'm crazy, but I'm not delusional. I don't think the med filter is a magic bullet. I don't think one tip solves all the problems in ELT lesson planning. And I'm certainly not afraid to poke holes in my own ideas and anybody else's ideas also. But in fact, I think it's really healthy that people start questioning things, because if a framework can't stand up to critique, it's probably not worth using. So what I want to do now is walk you through 5 common objections that I hear whenever I kind of share this with people. I haven't been sharing it for long, but these are kind of some things that popped up. Maybe some of these are already in your head as you've been listening to this, so that's good. Let's unpack them one by one. Yeah. So objection 1 or concern 1, this doesn't work for receptive skills. You are right. Receptive skills lessons do look kind of right. They look different. Receptive skills lessons look different. Reading and listening aren't about output in the same way, as like a systems lesson. But even there, you still need a spine. A lesson spine, not you as a person spine. The aim still matters. So are they inferring meaning? Are they interpreting tone? Are they identifying key ideas? The task still matters. Are they engaging with the text for a purpose? Or are they just answering surface level comprehension questions? Because surface level comprehension questions for me, very shallow. And the pivot. So that's often what saves these lessons, is when students are scanning without thinking, or they're guessing blindly, or they're missing some nuance. The pivot is your chance to step in and reframe. So yes, the med filter works for receptive lessons. It sharpens the focus a little bit, but we know that the objective is going to be slightly different because they're receiving the information. It's not heavily focused on output necessarily. So objection or concern number 2, but what if I have to use a course books or a fixed syllabus because I work in a school? Welcome to the club. We all have. I mean, yeah, it is what it is. I've worked in schools. I've worked in franchise schools, test prep centers, projects, whatever you want to call them, with very scripted syllabi. And you can't just throw it out. You have little pedagogical handcuffs on. But the med filter still can help you make better choices within those constraints. So you can ask yourself, what's the real point of this unit? Which activity actually delivers on the learning, and I'm going to make that my task, and I'm going to adapt it slightly to the point that you can. Where do I need to pause and check in with students? So you're not rebelling necessarily against the course book. It's the materials that you have to use, but you can refine the way that you're delivering and responding to your own students. So yeah and no, I get it. It would take a little tweaking. Objection number 3, or concern number 3, not all lessons can be boiled down to one aim or task. True. Longer lessons, sometimes they need layers, right? That's fine. But most 60 to 90-minute lessons, trying to hit 5 objectives and cram in 8 activities is not ambitious. It's just chaotic. So one clear aim doesn't mean dumbing things down. It means that your students actually know what they did and why they're doing it. And honestly, that's what they'll remember, not you squeezing in 10 different micro objectives. So if you have a longer lesson, maybe you kind of break it into 2. I don't know, but this is just, it's again a filter to help you kind of focus yourself. Objection 4, concern number 4, this oversimplifies the complexity of teaching. Okay. My short answer is no, but let me expand on it. No, it simplifies the plan, not the process. Teaching is extremely complex and very nuanced. Learners are unpredictable, but that's exactly why you need clarity when you plan. This filter, this idea, gives you this backbone, not a script. So you're still the one making the live decisions in the room, drawing on your own expertise, adapting in real time. The med filter doesn't take any of the complexity away. It gives you a compass so you don't get lost in planning. So, and the last one, what about creative or exploratory lessons? Yes, creativity matters. Exploration matters. But even those lessons need a purpose. If your aim is open, explore a theme, experiment with language, reflect on an issue. Still an aim. Students still have to do something that you can see. So your task has to invite that exploration, not just fill the time. And your pivot is where you check if they're actually digging deep or if they're kind of skating on the surface. So the filter doesn't kill creativity, it just kind of grounds it, if that makes sense. So here's my honest take. Just do honesty for everyone. Every objection I've ever heard about the med filter, or kind of this idea, has come down to the same fear that it's too simple. But that's kind of the point. Planning has become very bloated, in my opinion, and I just think teachers are drowning, and we don't need more layers, we need more clarity. And so I feel like this does that. This filter, these 3 ideas or questions, or however we want to put, and it doesn't replace your expertise, it just kind of supports it. And that's why I always say it's not a checklist, it's a compass. It's a way to keep you focused on what matters most, even with the noise, because there's a lot of noise in ELT about methods and materials and expectations and new tech, and you should focus on this, and you have to focus on a million things. Listen, all those things, in my opinion, they try to pull you off focus. And so this is just a very simple way of kind of distilling everything down in your lessons, because we're juggling so much other stuff. Okay, so let's bring this all together and wrap up, because it's been like a very long, but I felt I had to do this. So, okay. The med filter, it just is boiled down. 3 simple but very powerful checks, and you can apply them anytime to your lesson. 1 clear aim, Can you say what your students will actually do by the end of the lesson? Not what they're going to be exposed to, not what they'll quote unquote understand. What will they produce, complete, or demonstrate in real time? One intentional task. Does your main task deliver on the aim through real language use? If you deleted it, would the aim still happen? If yes, it's a filler. If no, then it's the heartbeat of your lesson. And one pivot point where you'll stop, observe, and adapt based on what's happening in the room. Not because the lesson went wrong, but because your students showed you something, and then we have to explore that. Whatever they produce, we've got to explore. And here's the kicker. If your lesson plan doesn't pass all three filters, just simplify, cut it down, because clarity beats complexity every single time. And I know that it can feel quite scary, and we equate detail with professionalism and simplicity with laziness, but it's actually the opposite. Stripping away all the noise that gives you this amazing bandwidth to just be present with your students. You can notice them, respond in the moment. And that's what makes lessons very effective, not the number of bullet points in your procedure. Again, I've seen teachers with perfect lesson plans lose the room completely because they were so busy sticking to the script, and others with nothing but 3 bullet points on a sticky note deliver some of the most amazing lessons that I've ever seen, because they were present and they were focused and they were responsive. And the difference wasn't the plan, it was just the clarity. So let's be clear. MedFilter isn't about cutting corners. It's not about doing less just to save time. It's about cutting through the noise so you can teach on purpose. Because at the end of the day, your students don't care how pretty your plan looks. They don't even see it. They don't care about whether they learned something amazing through this tech. They want to learn something. That's it. I don't care how they get there. They just want the result. And hopefully the MedFilter will help you do so. This brings me to my final point, and it's really just a thank you if you've gotten to the end of this video, because it was quite a deep dive. But yeah, that's it. So MedFilter in full. There you go, with all of the rationale and the reasoning and the thoughts behind it. I hope you enjoyed listening today. And I hope you did realize that this isn't about cutting corners at all or lowering standard. It's all about stripping things back to what actually matters in a lesson, a clear purpose, a meaningful task, and space to respond to your learners. And if you're one of those teachers who's been drowning, just absolutely drowning in 12-page lesson plans, or trying to tick off endless checklists, or spending more time formatting your plan than prepping for your actual class, this is your reminder. You don't need 20 stages. You don't need the fanciest tech. What you need is clarity, a plan that supports you, not one that suffocates you. And when I shared this at Macmillan, the New Voices event last week, I only had 15 minutes. And it was polished, it was conference ready, I hope. It was kind of the beautiful version of it. But today I wanted to give you the messy version, the full breakdown with all the detours, all the stories, all the justifications, and all my craziness, because the reality is teaching is messy, students are messy, and we need frameworks or guidance or compasses that make space for the mess, not ones that pretend that it doesn't exist. And honestly, I'd love to hear what you think. Does this resonate with your own planning? Do you already use pivots without calling them that? Do you feel the weight of over planning like I've described it, or not at all? So let me know. You can always connect with me. I'm up for conversations that challenge how we teach, push us forward in something a bit more real, more human, and more effective. So if you enjoyed this episode, share it with a teacher friend who needs to hear that it's okay to simplify. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss the next deep dive into whatever rant I might be having. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you can feel free to comment here, or you can follow me on Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT. I'd love to connect. So thank you again for sticking with me. Thank you for all the work that you do as teachers. And most of all, thank you for showing up for your students. Go out there, simplify your plans, and teach something powerful.
That's it for today. If you want more, I've got binge-worthy playlists right here on the channel. You can also grab some resources at kellypenningtonelt.com, Instagram at kellypenningtonelt, and yes, even LinkedIn, where I do my best impression of being professional. Links below. See you in the next one.